Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and don't forget to go and get that lovely hot drink, whatever it is you enjoy drinking, whether it's cappuccino, whether it's a hot coffee, whether it's a cup of tea, whether it's a cocoa. Go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it was with a plethora of mixed, vacillating, ambivalent feelings that I returned to my hometown in the Pacific Northwest, for I was not certain the kind of reception I would ultimately receive from the local residents living there, as many people have long memories rather like an elephant and find it exceedingly difficult to forgive and forget. I was only thankful that I didn't look like I did 5 years back. In a strange way, people not recognizing me was some form of consolation, small comfort, I know. My once bottle blonde hair, the height of fashion at the time, had long since grown out. My natural colour was now a dark chocolate brown colour. It had been cut in a short bob for me by one of the prison inmates, who had once been an aspiring hairdresser at a prestigious hair salon, but was subsequently incarcerated for getting involved in some money laundering with her partner. When it came to my nails, they were now natural, unpolished, trimmed, and very short, not false, unusually long, or painted in a bright pink colour, like they had been in my former days, when preening myself had been a prerequisite to my daily life. In those days I cared about fashion, and looking as preened as some people's poodles or Afghan hounds. It would seem vanity had fled from me, once I was incarcerated, faster than a March hare. I had no desire to reconcile or become reacquainted with her shallow, frivolous and facile ways, for fashion and pampering no longer held my attention. One thing I'd learnt in prison is that appearances are only skin-deep and insubstantial. I couldn't see myself going to the bother of dyeing my hair again, and as for acquiring fake nails at the nail boutique, it had lost its allure. It seemed pointless and insignificant now, rather like the tinsel on a Christmas tree, or the cherries on a chocolate cake, nice, but unavailing, ineffectual, or surplus to requirements. Supposedly 5 years in a woman's prison had matured me from a new wine into an older, more substantial wine, with deeper notes, and of a superior quality. I had become infinitely more palatable with age, a much nicer person in every regard. Prison had made me cherish and esteem the things that really matter in life, that no money can ever procure, like meaningful human relationships and the scintillating marvels of nature. I'd lie in my prison cell dreaming of taking a hike down a mountain trail and running through a flowering meadow. Prison enabled me to shed the inconsequential things in life, like a butterfly releasing itself from the confines of its old cocoon and flying far away. I wanted to put the whole gruesome episode of the tragedy behind me, to forget that it had ever happened. Yet there were things about that fateful night that haunted, possessed, hijacked my darkest, most tenebrous nightmares. The alcohol I'd consumed to excess had successfully aborted my memories, leaving behind a residue of uncertainty. On the face of it, horrifying flashbacks prevailed in my mind, most especially waking up in a police cell and being accused of running over the neighbour's Swiss au pair, in my boyfriend's truck of all things, in a drunken state. I do not remember a time when I felt more shame, self-loathing or disgust. For all intents and purposes, I'd been found passed out in the driver's seat, covered in my own vomit, while a woman that I'd supposedly run over due to my inebriated intoxication lay dying in the middle of the asphalt road. She was dead before the emergency services arrived to deal with her grievous injuries. I remember none of those harrowing details, but I had learnt I was responsible for this woman's death, and this horrifying knowledge was a weighty burden to have to bear. Ostensibly, my dissipating memories had been defeated by the alcohol, fleeing from my recall, so my mind was left cluelessly blank, like a piece of pristine white paper. As a result, I was forced to accept the accusations from the prosecution, as I could not defend the unassailable, incontestable evidence that mounted up against me, rendering me guilty as charged. In the past, I refused to drive when I'd drunk, so why I had been driving my boyfriend's truck that night, I do not understand or know, for he had never allowed me to drive in a sozzled condition before. My boyfriend Paddy had informed the police that I had stolen his car keys, willfully taken his truck on the road in an intoxicated state. Everyone believed him. For what reason would I have to doubt his testimony, as Paddy was a forthright, truthful, upfront character, who was as honest as the day is young. On that night I had consumed litres of punch that I had believed was fruit juice to quench an insatiable thirst. I had no memory of anything after that, so to think I could drive a truck in such a bladdered state was hard for me to fathom. The trouble is, when you have no recollection of an event, it is paradoxically illogical and implausible to defend your failed memory, for it soon becomes your deadliest enemy or foe, for it is in the darkness that many unanswered questions remain hidden, and secrets lie surreptitiously buried, shrouded in mystery. For some the darkness is a friend or ally, as it conceals their iniquitous deeds. For others like me, blindly oblivious of my own actions, the darkness can conspire against you in ways you never gleamed possible. I was exceedingly lucky. My parents had hired a fabulous lawyer, which meant I got out of prison after 5 years. Some people are not so lucky and have had to spend their lives in prison for lesser crimes than mine, so I was exceedingly grateful. Believe me, I know, for I have seen people incarcerated for life in cases that are far less than mine. But that is the way the cookie crumbles. Not everything in life is fair. I was blessed that people testified on my behalf, assuring the judge that I had always refused to drive under the influence of alcohol on former occasions, and that I had been responsible in that regard. They couldn't comprehend why I had behaved so incongruously, as it was out of character for me to do so. It would seem there were things about the whole incident that were highly questionable. The defence sowed enough seeds of doubt to ensure I would serve a light sentence. The suggestion that I could have been set up wafted around the courtroom like a sweet-smelling perfume, leaving enough uncertainty for the court to be merciful towards me. Yet despite everything, 5 years did feel like donkey's years, as being stuck in prison was not easy. Some of the girls were rough, who had done quite heinous things in their lives, possibly due to growing up in abusive family environments, without loving parental boundaries. Unquestionably, prison food had been like god-awful slop, the stuff they throw into pigs' troughs that I initially refused to eat, until my hunger got the better of me. The beds were as hard as nails, the cells confined and cramped, and as for privacy, there was none. The humiliation of open showers and intimate, shameless body inspections by the female prison guards, who seemed to enjoy our discomfort, invaded my dignity and self-respect faster than any deadly disease. Worse still, there was a lot of promiscuous behaviour among some of the women, who looked upon new arrivals with licentious, salacious, immoral aspirations, so the less said about that the better. Let's just say there were many wanton, debaucherous women interested in me from a romantic perspective, which almost certainly made my skin crawl, and my legs want to run faster than a cheetah, away from this godless, iniquitous place. But I was lucky, as I made friends with a tough woman who watched my back and was happy to receive cigarettes for payment. When the taxi drove down the long ribbon of asphalt lined with towering oak trees that had grown substantially in the last 5 years, I almost had to draw in a deep breath, with the relief of smelling the comforting, welcoming aroma of home in the air. Everything looked familiar. I focused on the purpose at hand, something I'd been meaning to do for a long time, when the opportunity finally arose. "Could you please take me to the end of the road over there? Just for a brief second. There's a memorial cross. I need to pay my respects there for a couple of minutes, if I may." "Of course," said the taxi driver. "Someone you know died there?" "Something like that," I said, climbing out of the taxi, with my handful of pretty white roses to lay down beside the cross. "Just give me a second, will you?" "You take your time, love, as long as you need," he said, pulling up his handbrake and waiting for me graciously. My parents had erected a white memorial limestone cross to replace the tacky wooden one in the turf that had been placed there by the locals under the oak tree. It read in loving memory of Elsa Gustafsson, who shall be sadly missed. I stood there for a sombre moment of reflection. I had never met the Swedish au pair, nor did I know what she looked like, but the guilt I felt for having mown her down in my boyfriend's truck in a state of intoxication was exponential. In truth, there was not a day that did not go by that I did not pray to the good Lord to forgive me for my iniquity. I knew that alcohol would never touch my lips again. How I wish I'd known the punch that night had been heavily laced with vodka, for I would never have drunk so much. I wouldn't have been so brazenly reckless and irresponsible. I apologized to Elsa every day for what I'd done, in robbing her of her whole future. I had come to a place of peace one night, when during a dream I could see the face of a pretty girl with blonde hair, and she was saying to me, "It's not your fault. It never was. But even so, you are forgiven. Please be at peace." Imagine my surprise when I found a picture of the deceased girl online. She looked exactly like the girl in my dream. I told myself that I'd seen her in passing some day, so my subconscious mind had remembered her. Why was the face in my dream so astoundingly accurate otherwise? I'd even written to her parents to apologize for what I'd done. I'd received a card in the post with only 2 words written on it: "You're forgiven." I remember I'd sobbed with gratitude for their forgiveness. It meant the world to me. I laid down the white roses by the memorial stone. "Elsa, I'm so sorry," I said, as I studied the spot where the calamity had occurred. "I'm so sorry, Elsa. I wish I could remember what happened to you, but I know that there is no day that doesn't go by that I don't regret your loss." I was surprised to see a bunch of fresh roses by the memorial, which I thought was strange, unless my mother had laid it down, as it was 5 years since Elsa's death, and her immediate loved ones lived in Sweden, so who was bringing her fresh roses? "Thanks," I said to the taxi driver, as finally I climbed back into his car. "You can go now." "You're sure you're all right?" said the taxi driver, handing me a tissue, which I gratefully accepted. I blew my nose loudly, wiping away my tears. "I can't help noticing you're very upset." "Don't worry, I'll be fine," I assured him. I stared at the familiar rows of eclectic houses in our street that brought nostalgic, wistful memories of my childhood flooding back. I could see snapshots in time like a slideshow in my head, with me playing with my childhood friends on the street, knocking on the respective neighbours' doors for trick-or-treats, or at the Morrison house on the 4th of July for fireworks, as well as homemade lemonade we sold at the side of the road to raise money for the local animal shelter. I had decided not to tell my parents I was coming home today. I wanted it to be a surprise, but now I was almost scared to get out of the taxi when I finally pointed out my family home. "It's this house over here," I said. The taxi driver seemed surprised that I sat in the car, failing to get out for a few minutes, as I took in my environment, like a soaking sea sponge. "I'd think you would be champing at the bit to get out of the taxi," he said to me kindly. "How long were you inside for?" 5 years. "Could have been worse," said the taxi driver. "Still, 5 years, I would have thought you'd be dashing out to get out of my taxi to see your family again." "I think I'm just acclimatizing to my new environment. Even returning home is an adjustment." "I suppose that makes sense. It must be good to see the trees, the grass, the pretty houses, instead of bars." "Oh, believe me, it is," I said happily. "You have no idea." I bid the taxi goodbye. I stood on the street watching his truck turn around and glide into the distance, until his vehicle vanished from my sight. I surreptitiously made my way to the front door, my heart flapping wildly like a large sail blowing in a wind. On the outside, our cottage-style home looked much the same as it had always done, but it did look as if it had acquired a recent new coat of paint. There were hanging baskets outside the front door, full of fabulous colourful blooms, from lobelia to geraniums. I knocked on the door, using the horseshoe knocker. I heard my mother's voice say, "Coming!" She opened the door, and for a moment we stood there staring at each other, neither of us daring to say a word. My mother suddenly rushed over to me, breaking the silence, embracing me with effusive warm hugs. We both cried tears of joy and regret. "Darling, I'm so glad you're finally back.
It's so good to see you."
"I'm so glad I'm back too," I said.
"I thought this day would never happen. 5 years was a hell of a long time. Far too long."
"Oh, believe me, Mum, when you're incarcerated, you're counting the days until you're free again. But every day in that prison cell was like a lifetime for me. It dragged on and on and on. Time seemed to slow down."
"Well, you're here now,"
said my mother, cradling me lovingly in her arms. "I want you to forget about everything. Put the whole wretched business behind you. Move on with your life. As my dear mother used to say, there's no point in crying over spilt milk. What is done is done. Pontificating over the past is never going to change a single thing, so it's futile to dwell on it. I'm sure you thought about the accident in prison an awful lot, but now a new beginning is well in order. A brand new, fresh start." "I agree," I said. "I have to put it behind me. If I don't, my past will suffocate me." "My point exactly, dear. I was surprised to see my bedroom had remained unchanged. It was just the way I'd left it, which was so reassuring and comforting. It was nice to think that some things had remained the same. When I glanced out of the window at my favourite magnolia tree, I was astounded by how much it had grown in 5 years. It was now utterly magnificent, while the backyard was more spectacular than I ever remembered. My parents had gone to town on the yard and the garden, with a mix of pretty perennials. It truly was like staring out on an English country garden, as I watched butterflies darting from one flower to another. "What do you think?" asked my mother, coming into the bedroom. "You mean the yard?" My mother nodded. "It's absolutely exquisite." "We did it for you," my mother exclaimed. "We knew how much the yard would mean to you when you came out of an ugly prison." "Thanks, Mum," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "That's so thoughtful of you. I don't think I'm ever going to want to leave this yard." In 5 years, our King Charles Spaniels, Giles and Shadow, had grown significantly older, but they recognized me at once, greeting me with happy woofs and thumping tails. "You see," said my mother kindly, "everyone has missed you. I, for one, have missed my precious daughter every single day. When my father returned home, I did not think he could let me go. I'd never seen him cry before, but he did on this occasion. 'Dad,' I begged, 'please don't be so sad.'
'Sad? Where did you get that idea from?' said my father. 'How could I possibly be sad, now that my beautiful girl has finally returned home? On the contrary, I'm the happiest man in the entire world to have my little girl back.' My father capped my head in his hands and looked at me tenderly. 'Today is a new beginning,' he said to me. 'What is past is past. Do you understand?' I nodded, my eyes filling with tears. 'Thanks, Dad,' I said. 'It still will be challenging living here, as some people might find it hard to forgive me for what happened. I can't say I blame them either. There's no excuse for a person to be driving drunk, is there? I don't know how I could have done something so reckless.' 'About that,' said my mother, 'you'll be glad to know that in church 2 Sundays ago, someone told Father Peterson that you would be coming out of prison soon. He did a whole sermon on forgiveness. It was very moving. People were actually crying. He was quoting scripture, telling people that if they judge, they too will be judged. If they condemn, they too will be condemned. He talked about the fact that none of us are without sin. He told the locals to treat you kindly when you come out of prison, to welcome you back into the community with open arms, because our Heavenly Father would reward us greatly. He made us see that what happened to you could happen to any of us. So after the service, people came up to me to apologize for some of the unkind things they've said about you. So I think returning home will not be as bad as you think, but it will still be a big adjustment, I'm sure." "What happened to Paddy Richards?" I asked my mother. "After I went into prison, he didn't even bother to write to me. I was very hurt. I guess he must have been angry with me for stealing the keys to his truck and running over the poor au pair. But, Mum, I don't remember anything. I can't believe I would be capable of doing those things drunk. But I was found in the driver's seat, so I have no choice but to accept the fact that it was me. Paddy got married, dear, a year after you were incarcerated, to Emma Robbins. Do you remember her? They have a child together now. Sweet little thing. He's an adorable child. I often see them shopping around town these days. It's clear Paddy is besotted by his little child. He's always carrying little Christopher on his back.
I must confess that every time Paddy sees me, he dashes away as fast as he can. He's never bothered to say hello to me in 5 years since the accident. Not once has he inquired after you, or even given me a fleeting nod hello. I think he's terribly upset over what happened. I must admit Paddy always struck me as an agreeable man, so his evasive behaviour is rather peculiar. I must admit his wife Emma goes to the other extreme. She always stops, asks me about how I am, and more to the point, how are you? She told me it was so unfortunate that you were incarcerated, as you has no memory of what happened, which I thought was a strange thing for her to have to say. She says she prays for you all the time. She's informed the locals to treat you well when you get out of prison, as everyone is inclined to make mistakes, and it is God who is the judge, not us. Emma carries a lot of clout around this neighbourhood, so I do think people will listen to her. I remember Emma, I said. She's pretty, very religious, isn't she? I think her father's a pastor. That's right, dear. For the first week on my arrival home, things were quiet, which is what I wanted. I chose to just lounge around the backyard, thoroughly enjoying the pretty garden, and some quality time with my parents. The following week my mother informed me that Emma, who was now married to my ex-boyfriend Paddy, wanted to take me out to dinner. Let's just say I was more than a little bewildered by such an unlikely invitation, but with no friends to speak of since I'd returned home, I was hardly going to reject that hand of friendship that was being extended my way, as beggars can't be choosers. Isn't that nice, dear, said my mother. She's booked a quiet booth at your favourite diner. You really must go. She's reaching out to you. You could do with some friends around here. Having Emma on side should make the community's attitude towards you much more convivial. Everyone likes Emma. She's an influential asset to the community. But Emma wants me to have lunch with her, I asked my mother, looking bewildered. I don't understand why. We were never friends before the accident. I knew her vaguely in passing. Why is she being so generous towards me? I think that's just who she is, dear. A very nice girl. As you can imagine, I was surprised that Emma was reaching out to me like this, but I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I had moved back to my hometown, and friends were in short supply, so if anyone was reaching out to me, I would gratefully accept their friendship. Emma was already waiting for me when I arrived at the diner. She was prettier than I'd remembered, with long auburn hair, blue eyes and fair skin, wearing a yellow dress with white daisies. Please sit down, she said, gesturing to a seat. It's really good to see you, Isabella, again. I really mean that. How have you been? Fine, I said, smiling shyly. It is good to be back. I bet, said Emma. Please look at the menu, Isabella. It's my treat. Go ballistic, order anything and everything you fancy. I imagine after that horrific prison food, you're dying to enjoy some quality eating. I recommend the steaks here. They make the best French fries as well. Thanks, it's really kind of you, Emma, to be so gracious, to reach out to me like this. I truly appreciate it. Others would be a lot more judgmental after what I did, but not you. People in a small town don't easily forget. I'm sure the gossiping, now that I've returned, is rife. I did receive 2 cards in the post with murderer on them. Emma's brow furrowed. She looked visibly distressed about my revelation, as sympathetic tears misted up in her eyes. You poor, poor thing! That's so mean! Please take no notice, Isabella. People can be brutally unkind sometimes, quick to forget that accidents easily happen. It never helps to hold grudges against others. It's so futile. Please don't blame yourself, she said, reaching out to my hand and giving it a tight squeeze. Remember, none of this was ever your fault, Isabella. What a strange thing to say, I thought, as the waitress took our orders. We both ordered sirloin steaks, medium well, served with creamy peppercorn sauce, chips, onion rings, and blue cheese salad, complemented by double thick chocolate milkshakes. Is there anything else? Asked the waitress. No, it's fine for now, said Emma, waving her away as if she was swatting an irritating fly. Don't come back unless I call you. I need privacy, she told the waitress. Me and my friend here. We've got a lot of catching up to do. You're probably wondering why I invited you over to lunch. Now, it goes without saying I want to welcome you home, of course I do, and extend the hand of friendship. That's a given. But I need to talk to you about an exceedingly delicate matter concerning my husband Paddy. You do know that me and your ex got married. she said, looking rather embarrassed, flushing a bright pink colour. I hope that's not upsetting to you. Yes, my mother told me about that. Congratulations. No, I'm not upset. Me and Paddy, we were more friends. In truth, the relationship had run its course. I was upset, though, that he never contacted me in prison. It would have been nice to have heard from him. I definitely think the two of you would be right for each other. He needs someone who has his back like you. I gather you have a beautiful boy together. I'm very pleased for the both of you. That's so nice of you to say. He is the apple of his father's eye. Very naughty, but we love the bones of him, we do. How is Paddy? Since the accident, I mean. Is he angry with me after what happened? I know he didn't get in touch with you, said Emma. I'm really, really sorry, Isabella, about that. I told him he should do so. I told him it was important to contact you, but he just didn't have it in him to do so. Well, I suppose I can't blame him, really. I mean, I did abscond with his truck in a drunken state and run over an au pair with his wheels, so I guess he probably never wanted to speak to me again. If the boot was on the other foot, I guess I might feel the same way. The next thing that Emma did surprised me. She handed me a suitcase. Open it, she said, looking at me intently. What is all this about? I said, opening the suitcase that was filled with crisp dollar notes. I gasped in astonishment. This is an enormous amount of money. Who on earth is it for? Why is it in cash? Why are you showing it to me? It's $1 million. It's for you, Isabella. It's compensation for the 5 years you served in prison. It's the least I could do in the circumstances. You see, Isabella, you didn't run down that Swiss au pair like you thought you did. My husband did. He was driving you home in his truck. He was only a little tiddly at the time. You were very drunk. You could barely sit up straight. The roads were incredibly quiet. It was 2:00 in the morning. The au pair had let the family schnauzer dog out for a pee. The mischievous dog ran across the road. She ran after him. The timing was imperfect. That was when Paddy ran over the woman. He could see she was dying. He freaked out. He put you in the driver's seat, collected the dog, and put it back into the house, as the front door was ajar. He phoned emergency services, made an anonymous phone call, saying he'd seen a woman driving erratically down the road in a drunken stupor, and that she had run over a pedestrian. Oh my God! Paddy set me up! That's despicable! How could he do such a terrible thing to me? I know, said Emma, her eyes filling with tears. They spilled down her cheeks. She held my hand in hers, squeezing it tightly, looking into my eyes pleadingly. Please don't be mad, Isabella. Of course you have every right to be, but you've served your sentence, and it's over now. I talked to my father about what could be done to redeem the situation. He said we needed to give you financial compensation. Granted, you could sue Paddy, but he will deny the whole thing. So will I. You see, at the end of the day, Isabella, I have to stick my neck out for my family first. I love Paddy. My son needs his father. If he was to go to prison, it would totally destroy him. I have to watch out for the family. Please try to understand that. Please have it in your heart to forgive Paddy. He desperately needs your forgiveness. We all do. Why are you telling me this? You could have kept your mouth tightly shut, and I would be none the wiser. Most people would have done just that. It's brave of you to tell me this. Because I don't want you to go through life blaming yourself for this accident, Isabella. I assure you Paddy lives with the self-reproach and rueful regret of his guilt every day. It's punishment enough. He has terrible nightmares over what he has done. Please accept this money on behalf of all of us as compensation. Paddy would rather put a bullet through his head than go to prison. When he put you in the driver's seat, it was only because he felt you would cope better than he would in prison. Men's prisons are notoriously tough, hostile, uncongenial places. With someone as good-looking as Paddy, God knows what would have happened to him. With some of those amorous male prisoners looking for a pretty boy to seduce. You hear horrific stories about what goes on in men's prisons. I nodded. I understood perfectly. I knew all too well about the promiscuous behaviour in prisons. I had heard some horrendous stories that did not bear repeating. Please tell me what you're thinking, said Emma, looking concerned. I stared at the money and then at Emma. I do forgive Paddy. I do understand why he did what he did. It doesn't make it right. His behaviour was atrocious, but I get why he did what he did. I thought you'd shout at me, scream blue murder, said Emma, her eyes tearing up. I thought you'd lose it with me.
But I couldn't live with the knowledge that you thought you'd killed someone. I had to let you know the truth. I don't want you to go through life crippled by guilt."
"I've already served time," I said. 5 years is way too long. I wouldn't want Paddy to go behind bars. It was a terrible accident, but both me and Paddy were drunk. Already too many people have been hurt by this incident. It's best we put it behind us. Forget it ever happened." "Thank you. You're such a good person, Isabella. I'll do my level best to make people around here be nice to you. I really will. I even got the pasture to lecture on forgiveness recently." "Oh, that was you. Thanks, Emma. People have sent me welcome home cards, flowers and chocolates with messages of love, saying that everybody makes mistakes and that they forgive me. But obviously, as I was saying, I have also had some nasty mail." "Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that you've had some positive messages from locals. It's like the social media, isn't it? You get some nasty trolls out there that leave vindictive messages. I asked my dad why people do such mean things. You see, as a pastor, he understands human psychology better than most. He said one should pray for the trolls, for they are the people in society filled with hatred and issues with low self-esteem. If they hurt someone online by leaving nasty messages like you're ugly, fat or stupid, or even worse stuff than that. Believe me, there is worse stuff, like people saying, "Rot in hell, I wish you were dead." I've heard some nasty, really shocking stories about young people taking their own lives based on the mean comments of others. Oh, I believe it. Remember, I've been in prison. I know about human depravity and the mean things people can say to each other. It can be a warped world out there, but you just have to ignore the spiteful things people can say. My father says you pray for people that hate you and say all kinds of mean things against you. It's the best way to deal with people like that. They only say these horrible things to feel better about themselves anyway, as they're so miserable. And you know the saying, misery loves company. He's absolutely right about that, I said. I assure you, I shan't be going on social media. I can imagine I'd get some comments like murderer, rot in hell, stuff like that. Look, Isabella, you will take the money, won't you? My father would also like to pay all the lawyers' fees your parents incurred. It really would make me feel a whole lot better. Obviously, I wish we could give you much, much more. Ostensibly, you lost 5 years of earning a salary. You had to eat awful food and put up with being accused of something you didn't do. You need to accept this money. Hopefully, it'll give you the capital you need to have a flying start in life. I discussed everything with my father. He said giving you the money was the best thing we could possibly do. I know it doesn't compensate for the 5 years you lost, but it is a way of making restitution. Thanks, I said. I will accept it as compensation, as I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life. I certainly don't want to be sponging off my parents, but I would like to have words with Paddy. I think we both need closure together. I'd like to speak to him, tell him he's forgiven. My mother said he always behaves strangely when she sees him and never acknowledges her. That's because he's so racked with the guilt of what transpired. I think if he knows you forgive him, Isabella, for what he did, he'll be able to live with himself. Every week he goes to the memorial site your parents erected, leaving roses for the Swedish au pair that died. I've literally seen Paddy crying like a baby at times. He still feels so raw about what happened. Let's change the subject, shall we, Emma? Talk about something more positive. Emma's face brightened. I'd really like us to be friends, Isabella. And we shall, I said. You would probably assume I'd walk away from my meeting with Emma furious about what I'd uncovered, angry for having spent 5 years in prison for something I did not do. But you would be wrong about that. You see, I felt a monumental relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulder, a weight I'd been carrying for a very long time. I had not personally been responsible for killing that au pair, meant I was no longer tormented by the dreadful guilt that had robbed me of so much peace. Granted, I had spent 5 years in prison. Every day had been a reminder of what I was missing in the outside world, for there is no doubt that being incarcerated is like being a caged bird with clipped wings, as you are restricted from being able to fly. Your freedom is confiscated from you. It is the hardest thing of all. Yet despite everything, prison had given me one treasured quintessential gift, and that was a zealous appreciation for life, the bounteous beauty of the natural world. For when you're incarcerated, you dream of being out in nature all the time, You imagine the smell of freshly mown grass, or the sweet smell of jasmine in the early evening. You envisage yourself walking in nature, in wood groves with tall, imposing, masterful trees. You can see your feet walking over the soft earthen floor. You think about glorious sunsets and sunrises, beautiful twinkling lakes and streams, and, of course, the magnificent ocean. You can perceive yourself walking across a soft sandy beach, with the cool ocean water bathing your feet as the waves spread out across the sand. I had missed it all, but I wasn't angry. Too much had happened in 5 years to be angry. I didn't have the energy for anger anymore. Nor did I want to embrace such an inefficacious, unavailing emotion. It was too late for all of that. Instead, I felt empathy and compassion for Paddy. Granted, he had unfairly, dishonourably wronged me, but he had to live with the torment of what he'd done. The guilty conscience, regret, self-reproach, condemnation and contriteness. I knew about what that was like, as I'd experienced it all for myself. The poor man was literally carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and if I could ease him of some of the heavy weight, I most certainly would. People falsely assume that when someone commits a hit and run, they get off scot-free. I doubt that to be the truth, for when you believe you've accidentally killed a human being, living with the guilt and remorse is punishment enough. I should know. I lived with rueful attrition for 5 years. The mean comments from people were like water off a duck's back, as no one hated me more than I hated myself. The next day I got an SMS from Emma saying that Paddy would meet me in the woodgrove late afternoon, early evening, and to bring a torch. That way we would not be seen together by the local gossips in town. It seemed like a great idea to me. "You can walk in the woodgrove and talk," Emma suggested. "Thanks for doing this, Isabella. Your forgiveness will really help Paddy heal. He's over the moon you've accepted his money." The very next morning my parents couldn't help fail to notice that something was different about me. "You look lighter, dear, happier," said my mother. "You're so much more radiant." "It's just good to be back home," I said. "I feel as if a load has been lifted off my mind." My parents looked thrilled to see I was coming out of my shell. They couldn't comprehend the freedom I felt now that the guilt had been lifted off my shoulders. I was hoping to do the same for Paddy this evening. It was late afternoon when Paddy and I had decided to meet. I took along my torch with me, as I knew it was likely to get very dark quickly. I parked my mother's truck in the parking bay at the Woodgrove and proceeded on my way to the trail. So glad to be experiencing a walk. It was so beautiful. The afternoon had faded. The soft golden light of the sunset dappled the firmament in contrasting layers of gold, tangerines, pinks and oranges, the colours of a blushing peach in all its glory. I stared in awe at the towering trees of the woodgrove as they basked under this brilliant golden glaze, marvelling at how mighty and tall they were, as they penciled up into the sky with such regal repose, with their boughs heavily laden with pretty leaves that jiggled slightly in a fresh southerly breeze as it blew into the woods, so that everything swayed and moved as though dancing. I could smell the fresh, intoxicating scent of wild flowers on the wind, and the smells of the ponderosa pine trees. The earthen floor was piled with golden leaves, as some of the oak trees had prematurely dropped their leaves, some that were being lifted up by the wind like celestial butterflies, others being crunched beneath my feet. The earthen floor appeared precipitous and rocky, but the ground was soft to the touch. I sat down under an oak tree as I waited for Paddy to arrive. I could hear some birdsong in the valley, even this late in the afternoon. I sat there and watched slivers of silvery light twinkle through the boughs of the trees, casting their shadows onto the earthen floor. Then I saw him. It was Paddy. I could hardly believe it. The man looked like a shadow of his former self. He had lost so much weight, and underneath his eyes there were dark shadows caused from lack of sleep. He saw me for a moment and ran into my arms, and he began to sob like a baby. Paddy was never the type of man to air his emotions like this, but he was visibly distressed. "I'm so sorry, Izzy. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." My heart just melted like butter. I had so much compassion for Paddy. I could feel his remorse. "I forgive you, Paddy. I forgive you for everything. It's all right. Stop crying, please. Please, please, it's all right. I promise you it's all right." He looked at me through tear-filled eyes.
But why, after what I did? I made you take the blame for Elsa's death. I put you in the driver's seat. I blamed you for what I did.
I told you, Paddy, I forgive you. For the record, Elsa's parents forgive you too.
How do you know that?
Asked Paddy, looking stunned. They sent me a card saying, "You're forgiven." Paddy's face visibly relaxed.
They said, "You're forgiven," he repeated.
Yes, they did. Come on, I said to Paddy. Let's go for a walk in the woodgrove. Forget about everything. Move forward, shall we? I've paid the price for us both in prison. Let's forget about everything. You've got a wife and a child now. A wife that needs her husband. She loves you very much. And a son who needs his father. You cannot allow guilt to eat you up. Life is too short. Believe me, I know.
Paddy laughed. Prison has made you philosophical. You've changed, Izzy. Where's the blonde hair gone? And the long pink nails, he teased.
I've shed those superficial things, I said. They're surplus to requirements now.
I like that, said Paddy. And for the record, your natural beauty rarely becomes you. Personally, I prefer it. A lot of men prefer women who don't try and look like Barbie.
I never tried to look like Barbie, Paddy, I protested.
Well, maybe you did just a wee little bit, he said, eyeing me mischievously. I'm glad you've given up on the long nails. The number of times you scratched me with them, I dread to think. You were worse than our cat Joey.
I was not.
You were, he teased. Paddy let out a huge sigh. Joking aside, he said wistfully, I just keep praying to God he sends me a sign from heaven, that he forgives me. Then I think I will find my peace.
What sort of sign? I asked.
I don't know, said Paddy. Something that is undisputably a sign, like an eagle perching on my roof at home, or a mountain lion bringing her cubs onto our patio. I would be happy with a sign like that. You see, I believe God uses signs from nature to bring us messages of a kind.
You do? I said.
Yes, I really do. We continued to walk up the hilly incline into the woodgrove. We talked for ages about many things, not caring a jot about the darkness that descended over the woodgrove, for we had come fully prepared for that. And besides, there was something quite pleasing about walking in the grove at night. It was liberating being in the dark with the light of our torches and the soft shadows of moonlight dancing across the forest floor, while we listened to the pretty sounds of the crickets and frogs. Then quite suddenly we heard a sound that was so peculiar that both Paddy and I suddenly stood terribly still. We held our breaths. We sensed something was moving towards us. Paddy quickly beckoned for me to hide behind a tree, which we both did, switching our headlights off, while we remained very quiet. Then we heard the strange sound again. It sounded like something titanic in size was moving through the woodgrove.
What the hell? I whispered to Paddy, who still had his fingers on his lips, urging me to be quiet.
The only way I can describe the sound was that thumping feet were pounding the forest floor so hard that it physically vibrated. Then out of the tall swaying trees emerged a dark, shadowy silhouette. I remember thinking, what the hell is this dense black silhouette that looked like a giant against the grey sky? Was it real? Was it a ghost? I couldn't be sure. To my amazement, the creature headed directly towards us. I was filled with the most paralysing fear that gripped me so forcefully I was unable to even move or scream. Then there he was, standing yards away from us. Soft shadows of moonlight danced over his handsome, human-like face. I was astonished. It was a Bigfoot, looking directly at us. For a moment we stared. The Bigfoot reciprocated our stare by staring back at us. I was surprised to find I was locked in his eyes. They were so kind and congenial. I felt no fear, despite his titanic size. He was easily over 7 foot tall, 3 foot wide, and 600 pounds. The Bigfoot's treacle-coloured eyes filled my heart with a loving, energising warmth that I had never ever experienced before, that is not of this world. I can only describe it as angelic. The creature scratched his head, looked at us for a moment, and nodded, as if he was greeting us cordially.
but I sensed he could read our hearts like a book. The next thing he did was tapped us both on the shoulders so gently, with such a personal nudge. Then he turned around and glided away in the forest, glancing back briefly over his shoulders with smiling eyes.
"Did you see that?" said Paddy. "I think God has forgiven me. That was a Bigfoot. You can't get a better sign than that. But he seemed so angelic, as if God himself had sent him to us."
I could not dispute Paddy's claims. This unlikely meeting with the Bigfoot, with his arresting powerful presence and his formidable mighty body, had felt outer-worldly. We both proceeded to put on our headlamps, and then suddenly I noticed a carving in the wood of the tree. We both lit up the writing to see what it said. I thought it was going to say something like, "Annie loves Tommy," you know, the usual thing you'd expect to see in a tree trunk. But instead we saw the words, "You are forgiven." Me and Paddy gasped. The universe had sent us a cryptic sign. I'm glad to tell you, after that anomalous event, we all moved forward with our lives, without regret, knowing that all was definitely forgiven. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.